1492. Spain had just vanquished the last remnant of the Islamic Caliphate in Iberia. This long struggle lasted for almost 8 centuries, and at the end the dominant power to emerge in Spain is Castile. Castile was an unlikely candidate for this at the start of the Reconquista. With its mediocre land and sparse population, Castile was poor and backward. Its people, however, were always ready for war. Feudalism never fully developed in Castile, and the only requirement for nobility was the willingness and ability to fight. With a large surplus of fighting men, the desire for more land and new subjects to lord over was constantly unquenched. First little by little, then by great leaps and bounds, the better part of Iberia had to submit to Castile. With the conquest of Seville, a rich trading hub connected to the sea by a navigable river, Castile became open to the vast ocean. Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile ruled Spain as co-monarchs since 1469. Aragon, Ferdinand's domain, had a long seafaring tradition, however its energy had mostly been spent on expansion in the Mediterranean and in Italy. Thus, the lion's share of building the Spanish Empire will fall on Castile. Its main rival in this is Portugal. Portugal had concluded its own Reconquista centuries ago, and thus could commence its naval expansion with a head start. Madeira was conquered in 1418, the Azores in 1442, and Cape Verde in 1462. The Gold Coast of Africa was reached by 1471. Spain in turn claimed the Canary Islands. Conflict over the island chain led to the War of the Castilian Succession in 1475. Spain won on land but lost to Portugal at sea. A compromise was reached in 1479. By the Treaty of Alcacovas, Spain could keep the Canaries, however Portugal was granted exclusivity on all exploration south of Cape Boador. This left Spain with only 2 avenues for expansion, southward and westward. Expansion into North Africa was attempted, but due to stiff resistance from the Moors, this proved to be impractical, leaving Spain with only one option. By the late 1480s, both Spain and Portugal are working hard to figure out an alternative route to India and the fabled Spice Islands, one that would bypass the Islamic realm. If either kingdom could best the other and reach India first, they would have access to boundless riches and endless opportunities. Exotic spices, silks and porcelain would be imported by the shiploads and distributed all over Christendom. The stakes are very high indeed. There are 2 theories on how to reach India. Both theories accept that the world is round. The first claims that west of Europe there is a chain of islands corresponding to Atlantis. Sailing past these, one would reach India. The other theory states that the world is far smaller than the first school of thought believes, and thus if one sails far enough west, one is bound to reach Japan or China. Once this is achieved, India would be just a short hop away. Christopher Columbus, the son of a Genoese weaver, is a firm believer in the latter theory. In spite of his pedigree, Columbus has considerable experience as a sailor and as a keen student of cartography. During his journeys, he sailed to the coast of Ionia, to Iceland, and even to Africa on a Portuguese ship. Columbus first tries to sell his scheme of reaching Asia by a westerly route to the King of Portugal. John II, however, is convinced that the shortest way to reach India is by sailing around Africa. With no luck in Portugal, Columbus heads to Spain in 1486. The Catholic monarchs, especially Isabella, are interested in the idea, but Columbus has to wait until the conquest of Granada is concluded. His insistence that he gets a hereditary governorship and a share of the royal revenue in the lands he discovers only makes things harder. But with powerful backers at court and the war concluded, Columbus finally gets a royal commission in 1492. He sets out from Palos on the 3rd of August 1492 with 3 small ships and 89 men. 6 days later, he reaches the Canaries and departs from there on the 6th of September. Land is sighted on the 12th of October. Columbus first lands in the Bahamas, and from there he proceeds to discover Cuba and the island that will be known as Hispaniola. He finds there the Taino people, who use Stone Age technology and practice subsistence agriculture. He christens them Indians, since he is firmly convinced that he landed in Asia, most likely in China or Japan. Columbus finds the Taino to be timid and excessively peaceful. He trades European goods for a few trinkets of gold, being fully satisfied that he proved the concept that riches can be found in this new land. While there, Columbus loses one ship and so has to leave behind 39 men on Hispaniola. He set sail to Spain on the 15th of January 1493, taking a northerly route by way of the Azores, reaching land in Portugal and heading from there to Spain. Columbus is welcomed at court as a hero and tells of his discovery of Asia. The monarchs are fascinated by the foreign trinkets of gold, and their imaginations run wild as Columbus tells them tall tales of endless riches that these foreshadow. To protect their interests, the monarchs sent Columbus back with a much larger fleet of 17 ships and 1,200 men in September. They also take steps on the diplomatic front. With the help of the Pope, a fellow Spaniard, they bring about the Treaty of Tordesillas. The treaty divides the seas between Spain and Portugal, with Spain claiming all new discoveries west of the line, while Portugal claims the ones to the east of it. This is an easy concession for Portugal to make, as they already know the route to Asia, while Columbus is still just speculating about one. Nonetheless, the colonization of the New World is already underway. But nothing goes as the monarchs had intended. The 1,200 Spanish settlers are only interested in getting gold, and they all want it now. They fall upon the peaceful Indians, despoiling them of all their meager possessions, killing and enslaving many. Priests who came along are appalled by this, while the settlers insist that Columbus is not doing enough. Hispaniola is colonized on the model that was used in the Canaries. Encomiendas or commissions are granted to the settlers, whereby an Indian village is compelled to do labor in the service of the encomiendero, a hybrid system between serfdom and slavery. But even this is not enough. Soon the Spanish start fighting amongst themselves. Many return to Spain disillusioned and file sharp complaints against Columbus. Columbus himself, who is essentially a navigator and a mariner, is completely overwhelmed by the situation. He discovers 2 more islands, Jamaica and Puerto Rico, but has little more to show than what he found on the first voyage. By this time, it's quite evident that Columbus did not find Asia. Ferdinand and Isabella no longer wine and dine him, however he is still entrusted with leading a further expedition. The purpose of this is to establish whether the New World is a large continent or just a group of islands. This is very important, since the new discoveries are now seen as a potential springboard to Asia. In 1498, Columbus discovers the Orinoco River, concluding that there is indeed a continent there. After this, he returns to Hispaniola. While he was gone, Santo Domingo, the first settlement to survive, had been established by his brother, whom Columbus left in charge. The problems, however, have not abated, and more complaints are lodged against Columbus. Ferdinand and Isabella finally have enough and order his arrest. His replacement arrives in 1499 and Columbus is sent back in chains. When he arrives, the monarchs pardon him and even allow him a 4th voyage of exploration. However, Columbus is not restored as governor. During this 4th voyage, Columbus charts the coast of Central America, bringing back valuable information about another ocean and the rich kingdom to the west. This, however, is the admiral's last voyage. He retires to Spain and dies of gout in 1506. But this, of course, is not the end, but rather the beginning of exploration. Vicente Yanez Pinzon, one of Columbus's partners, discovers the Amazon River in 1499. In 1501, Rodrigo de Bastidas, who arrived with the Second Fleet, discovers the Gulf of Uraba and Panama. Alonso de Ojeda, who likewise arrived with the Second Fleet, explores the coast of Venezuela and attempts to establish a first settlement there. Amerigo Vespucci, a fellow explorer, writes about his adventures and instantly becomes a bestseller. The name America soon enters into public consciousness. These explorations are facilitated by the new Viceroy of the Indies, Nicolás de Ovando. In 1502, Ovando arrives with 30 ships and 2,500 men. He pacifies the Indians who had become warlike due to their mistreatment and also ends the conflict between the settlers. Hispaniola becomes moderately prosperous, with an economy based on sugar plantations, cattle, and pigs. There is, however, very little gold, and most of the Indians die out due to the constant conflict. The solution to this problem is to colonize the other islands. Puerto Rico is conquered in 1508, Jamaica in 1509, followed by Cuba in 1511. In the same year, Diego Columbus, the explorer's son, regains his hereditary right to govern, as per the contract his father had made with the monarchs. Columbus Jr., however, proves to be unpopular, especially with Diego Velázquez, the conqueror of Cuba. Velázquez thinks up a clever scheme to get rid of Columbus. He calls up a general council that is filled by his loyalists, who in turn elect him as the governor of Cuba and authorize him to deal directly with Spain, thus bypassing Columbus's authority. Since Velázquez has powerful friends at court, this semi-legal shenanigan is allowed. Little does Velázquez know that this same legal maneuver will be used against him at some point. Nevertheless, thanks to his able and often brutal leadership, Cuba is fast becoming the center of the Spanish Empire in the Caribbean. The Caribbean, however, was not enough. Following the explorations of the mainland, Spain decided to establish 2 colonies on the continent. Nueva Andalusia on the east side of the Gulf of Uraba and Veragua on the west side. Nueva Andalusia is to be led by Alonso de Ojeda, the explorer of Venezuela. Ojeda establishes a settlement, however this soon fails. One of the settlers there is Vasco Núñez de Balboa, a young and ambitious adventurer who previously took part in Bastidas' explorations. Armed with this knowledge, Balboa manages to convince the rest of the settlers to pack up and move to the neighboring colony of Veragua. Here Balboa and his men defeat an Indian chief and found a successful colony at Darien. Meanwhile, the rightful ruler of Veragua, Diego de Nicueza, a nobleman of few abilities, is also trying to start a settlement further north. This settlement is defeated by Indians, and when Nicueza hears of Balboa's illegal colony, he quickly moves to take it over. Balboa, however, is one step ahead. Using the same legal trick Velázquez had used, he elects himself governor with the help of his cronies. Nicueza is denied entry into his rightful domain and is never seen again. Balboa won, however he is living on borrowed time. Unlike Velázquez, Balboa doesn't have powerful friends at court who might overlook this illegality. Therefore, he has no other choice but to prove himself. He starts by expanding the colony of Darien, partly by violence and partly by diplomacy. The grand prize, however, lies on the other side of the isthmus. The Spanish had known for years that there is a vast ocean across the continent that beyond any doubt would lead to Asia. Surely, if Balboa could find a way to this ocean, he will gain such favor that his previous crimes will be overlooked. Thus, in 1513, Balboa sets out with 190 men, and after a grueling trek across the mountains and the jungles, he discovers the Pacific Ocean. As soon as he gets back to Darien, word is sent to Spain to announce his discovery. Balboa's plan kind of works, and it doesn't. In 1514, Pedrarias Davila, an old nobleman of mean repute, is sent to take charge. Balboa's crimes are overlooked by Spain, however he has to content himself with being second in command. This is the worst position to be, owing to Pedrarias' extreme jealousy and paranoid nature. Pedrarias soon allies with Balboa's old enemies, and after a kangaroo court proceeding where the judge and jury are his acolytes, Balboa is condemned to die. After this, Pedrarias starts to expand his colony, subjugating Indians left and right. He moves the capital to Panama, and by the 1520s the colony begins to flourish. While all this was going on, the Portuguese were already in India, expanding their possessions and making big buck importing oriental spices. In 1511, Alfonso de Albuquerque conquers Malacca, establishing the Portuguese right next to the fabled Spice Islands. One of Albuquerque's men is the Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan. After the Malacca campaign, Magellan heads back to Portugal. Here he devises a daring plan. He claims that the Spice Islands can be reached by sailing west, circumnavigating America. He proposes his idea to the Portuguese court, however King Manuel sees no use for this second route, since he already controls the eastward way to Asia. Not finding any favor with the Portuguese, Magellan heads to Spain. Charles V, the young Habsburg emperor, is much more open to Magellan's plan. According to some theories and estimations, the Moluccas and the Spice Islands might just lie within Spain's sphere of influence, as per the Treaty of Tordesillas. To claim these perceived rights, Charles needs to act quickly. The colony in Panama is still in an embryonic state and doesn't have the infrastructure to launch an expedition from there. This leaves Magellan as the only possibility to get to the Spice Islands quickly. In September 1519, Magellan departs with 5 ships and 270 men. He heads to South America via the Canaries, reaching Brazil in December. He spends some time exploring the vast estuary of the River Plate and from there heads south. In October of 1520, he finds and navigates the straits that will later bear his name. From there he heads northwest, reaching the Philippines in March. Magellan claims the islands for Spain and promptly starts converting locals to Christianity. He achieves some success, however one tribe of natives proves particularly hostile. When Magellan and his crew try to impose their will by force, the captain and over half of his crew are killed. After this, Magellan's second, Juan Sebastián Elcano, takes command and tries to salvage what he can. The fleet immediately sets sail to Europe, heading directly to the Cape of Good Hope, and then north to the Canaries, avoiding Portuguese bases the best they can. By the time they reach Europe, only one ship remains out of 5, and 19 men out of 270. Nonetheless, the first circumnavigation of the globe was complete in 1522, a feat that would only be repeated 58 years later. As it turned out, only the Philippines fell within Spain's sphere of influence, however this was more than enough for Spain to gain a foothold in Asia. Thus, Charles V could rightfully claim that the sun never set in his empire. But to complete the trade route to Asia, one more piece was missing from the grand puzzle. This piece was Mexico. It's 1517. The Caribbean and Panama had just been conquered a few years ago. The main center of power of the Spanish Empire in America is Cuba, governed by the stern and ambitious Diego Velázquez. Velázquez had transformed Cuba into a moderately prosperous colony, however the riches the Spanish expected to find remain a mere illusion. The natural solution to this problem is more exploration and more expansion. In 1517, Velázquez commissions a small fleet led by Francisco Hernández de Córdoba to explore the mainland and, if possible, bring back slaves and gold. Córdoba sails west and discovers the Yucatan Peninsula. The Spanish are astonished by what they find. The Yucatan is inhabited by Mayan peoples, who are a far cry from the Stone Age culture of the Taino Indians of the Caribbean. The Mayans live in well-built stone houses, they have a sophisticated religion, worshipping at large pyramid-shaped temples, and they have advanced forms of agriculture and industry. Finally, the Spanish have found what they were looking for. Córdoba tries to make contact with the Mayans, however, at every instance his men are ambushed and the expedition ends in a complete disaster. But Velázquez is not dismayed. In 1518 he assembles another fleet, placing it under the direction of Juan Grijalva. Grijalva's instructions are clear. He should open trade, but he must abstain from founding a permanent settlement. Velázquez wants to do this himself, in order to reap all the profit and all the glory this might entail. Grijalva follows his instructions to the letter. As he sails west, he discovers the island of Cozumel, then rounds the Yucatan Peninsula and heads north along the coast of Mexico. Here he meets with a deputation of ambassadors who are already waiting for him. The Spanish have no way to communicate with these Indians, however, from the rich gifts of gold they receive, they deduce that these people must be the ambassadors of a powerful empire. Grijalva heads back to Cuba with this priceless news. Meanwhile, Velázquez is already preparing another fleet, much larger than the previous ones. Its commander is Hernan Cortes, a nobleman from Castile who arrived in America in 1504 and became a well-established member of the Spanish elite in Cuba. His instructions are the same as Grijalva's. Trade and capture some slaves, but don't establish a settlement. But unlike Grijalva, Cortes is a very ambitious man. He goes heavily into debt, augmenting his fleet with more ships and more men, announcing publicly that he does in fact intend to found a colony. When Velázquez hears about this, he explodes with rage and revokes Cortes's commission, also ordering his arrest. But by then, Cortes is already on his way, with 11 ships and 600 men. They first land on the island of Cozumel. Cortes expressly forbids his men from harming anyone, trusting in diplomacy instead of force. His approach works and the Indians welcome Cortes into their town. Cortes finds out about 2 Spaniards who had been shipwrecked several years ago and since then have become integrated into Mayan society. One of them, a man named Aguilar, joins them, the other decides to stay. With Aguilar, the Spanish finally have a reliable interpreter, enabling them to parley with the Indians of the Yucatan. Next, the fleet heads to the river Tabasco to take on further supplies. Here the Indians have already made up their mind to fight, in spite of Cortes's efforts to appear peaceful. After a hard-fought amphibious landing, the Spanish rout the Indians and occupy their town. However, the next day, a massive force of some 10,000 Indians shows up. The Indians wear cotton cuirasses and are armed with bows, slings, spears and sword-like implements with razor-sharp obsidian blades. The vast majority of Cortes's men are armed with sword and buckler in the rodeiro fashion. There are also a few dozen musketeers and crossbowmen, 16 horsemen and around a dozen cannon. As the battle starts, the Indians fall on the Spanish like angry hornets. Spanish artillery and muskets prove their value, cutting swathes into their densely packed ranks. After the first unsuccessful rush, the Indians decide to keep their distance and shower the invaders with arrows and stones. This takes a heavy toll on the Spanish, wounding many and killing one. Cortes decides that the only way to salvage the situation is to boldly rush forth and attack. This aggressiveness stuns the Indians and they start to fall back. At this decisive moment, Cortes sends in his cavalry to attack them from the rear. These audacious attacks pay off and the Indians leave the field. Cortes loses 2 Spanish soldiers for 800 Indians killed. Following this battle, Cortes does what will become his signature move. He sets all his prisoners free, sending them back with rich gifts and a peace proposal. The Indian chiefs comply and bring Cortes some meager gifts of gold. They apologize for not bringing him more and explain how all their valuables had been stolen by a powerful empire in the north. They also give the Spanish 20 women. One of these women, whom the Spanish call Doña Marina, is a princess from Mexico. She speaks both Mayan and Nahuatl, the language used in the north. Her skills as a translator will prove invaluable later on, with Aguilar translating Spanish to Mayan and Marina translating Mayan to Nahuatl. After taking on provisions, the fleet weighs anchor and heads north, arriving at the island of Ulua. As news of their arrival spreads, a large delegation of Indians headed by persons of high rank arrives. They present Cortes with very valuable gifts and inform him that they are the representatives of the great Moctezuma II, emperor of the vast Aztec domain. Cortes likewise presents the delegates with gifts and tells them that he is merely here to trade and that he would very much like to meet this great Moctezuma. The ambassadors politely refuse him, saying that as he had just arrived it would be impossible for him to meet their emperor, but nonetheless they are welcome to stay in his country. Next, Cortes makes a frightful display, firing his cannon and showing off Spanish horsemanship. The ambassadors are very impressed and hurry back to their emperor to report what they saw. Tenochtitlan, the capital of this great empire, is situated on man-made islands within the Lake Texcoco, very similar to Venice but even larger, holding hundreds of thousands of people, with massive temples as large as the pyramids of Egypt. The Mexica people who inhabit this city were originally nomads from the north. They arrived in the region of the Mexico Valley in the 14th century and quickly submitted the other city-states of the region. In 1428, the Triple Alliance had been formed between Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. This alliance then conquered vast regions of Central America, subjugating hundreds of cities and millions of people. The Aztec Empire is at the height of its power when Cortes arrives, ruling its subjects by fear, waging wars on a yearly basis, sacrificing hundreds of prisoners of war to their many gods. According to Aztec mythology, their ancestors themselves came from the east and had fair skin and beards. The resemblance of Cortes and his small party to these mythological figures is uncanny. Moctezuma is perplexed and cannot decide what to do. After consulting his nobles and his priests, he decides to monitor the situation and wait for further developments. Meanwhile, in the Spanish camp there is more and more discontent. Half of Cortes's men are loyalists of Velázquez. They maintain that Cortes had overstepped his bounds, so they should take what they have and return home. To preempt this, Cortes employs the same legal trick Velázquez had used to gain control in Cuba. The few huts that had been built are declared a colony and Cortes's loyalists elect him their official representative, authorizing him to deal directly with Spain, thus bypassing Velázquez. With this bold stroke, Cortes consolidates his authority, however it also means he is now in open rebellion. Similarly to Balboa, who had done this in Panama, Cortes is also living on borrowed time. He can either prove himself as an able governor, gaining favor with Spain, or face certain death at the hands of Velázquez. Therefore, he decides to march north to further explore these new lands. After several days, the Spanish are met by another delegation. They inform Cortes that they are from Chempoya, the capital city of the Totonacs. Their leader would love to meet Cortes, but due to him being very fat, he was unable to come, therefore Cortes will have to go to Chempoya. As soon as Cortes arrives, he strikes up a friendship with the fat chief, as the Spanish call him. The chief lavishes him with gifts and tells him how he would love to give more, but he and his people are very poor owing to the tyranny and rapaciousness of his Aztec masters. Cortes, being a keen politician, immediately understands where all this is going. He informs the fat chief that he was sent by his emperor to deliver peace and justice to this land. To the great joy of the chief, he promises to look into these abuses of power. But first he needs to build a base from where he could operate. With the help of the Champoyans, a small fortified settlement, Villarica de Veracruz, is built a few miles north of the city. As the Spanish settle in, 5 high-ranking tax collectors arrive from Tenochtitlan. The Totonac people of the region look upon these men with great fear and reverence, knowing well that if they disobey them, it will certainly cost them their lives. By a masterstroke, Cortes manages to convince them to arrest the tax collectors and promises he will make sure that no further taxes will be demanded of them. To further reassure them, he even offers to take the prisoners into his personal custody. The people of Champoya and the surrounding cities rejoice and begin to see Cortes as a benevolent liberator. Since Cortes had so easily achieved something so unthinkable, the idea that he and his men might be demigods starts gaining ground. However, unbeknown to the Champoyans, Cortes in fact gave the tax collectors presents and sent them back home unmolested. When Moctezuma hears of this incident, he becomes furious and decides to mobilize his forces, march to the coast and crush the Spanish. A few days later, when the tax collectors arrive unharmed and bearing gifts, he changes his mind and decides to give diplomacy another chance. Meanwhile, Cortes manages to convince his men to give up all the gold they had gathered and send this treasure to the emperor to secure his benevolence. Velázquez finds out about this and attempts to intercept the ship. However, luck is again on Cortes's side and the ship makes it to Spain. After another Aztec delegation arrives, attempting to placate him with rich gifts in the hope that he stays on the coast and doesn't go to Tenochtitlan, Cortes decides to do precisely this. Velázquez's loyalists protest, so Cortes orders all their ships to be scuttled, ensuring there's only one way to go: forward. Thus Cortes gathers up his troops and supplies, and with the help of his Indian allies begins to move inland. To get to Tenochtitlan, however, the Spanish have to cross the land of the Tlaxcala. The Tlaxcalans are a confederation of Indians surrounded on all sides by the Aztec Empire. According to some opinion, the only reason why they weren't conquered is that the Aztecs need a constant supply of prisoners of war to sacrifice to their gods. Every year the Aztecs would come and drag away thousands of Tlaxcalans, leaving death and destruction in their wake. They also denied them such basic goods as salt, a very serious problem in the tropical region. Equipped with this knowledge, Cortes plans to form an alliance with the Tlaxcalans and turn them against the Aztecs. But things don't go the way Cortes intended. The Tlaxcalans think the Spanish are trying to trick them, so they summon all their warriors to arms. Cortes in turn instructs his men to be constantly on guard and vigilant, an order that will be maintained all throughout the campaign. On the 2nd of September, the two armies meet on an empty field. The Tlaxcalans initially send out a couple thousand warriors as a vanguard. The Spanish fall upon them in their characteristic manner, forcing the Indians to flee. This, however, is a trap. The main army of some 40,000 warriors is lying in wait further along a ridge. The Spanish are initially startled by the ambush, but due to their discipline, they quickly form a defensive formation. Cannons, muskets and crossbows inflict terrible slaughter on the dense ranks of Tlaxcalans. A furious close-quarters battle ensues that lasts for an hour. Cortes exploits every mistake the Indians make, using his cavalry as a shock troop. Finally, the Indians retreat after losing thousands of men. The Spanish also lose several soldiers and 2 horses. Most of their men are wounded and so exhausted that they likewise have to retreat. Cortes takes up a strong defensive position at an abandoned temple. In his signature move, he frees his prisoners, lavishes them with gifts, and sends them back with a peace proposal, arguing that all he wants is free passage through Tlaxcala. The next morning, the Indians return with a negative answer, so Cortes gives them more presents and sends them back with the same proposal. He also orders a detachment to parade around the battlefield to show the Indians just how confident they are. But nothing could be further from the truth. At this point, the Spanish are only interested in survival, knowing well that if they lose, they will be massacred to the last man. With this premise, the two armies again take to the field. The Tlaxcalans are even more numerous, but it quickly becomes apparent that they are much more reluctant than the previous day. After firing their arrows, they charge the Spanish in a desperate and disorganized manner. Since the Spanish are so few, and they are so many, most of them don't even reach the Spanish line, being cut down by cannonballs where they stand. The battle is concluded in the same fashion as the day before, with the Indians abandoning the field. But by this time, the Spanish are in a desperate state, with most of them, including their horses, being wounded. They crawl back to the temple and adopt a strictly defensive position. But the Tlaxcalans are also no better off. After staggering losses, the realization that the Spanish might indeed be mythological creatures starts to dawn on them. Therefore, they consult their priests to decide what to do. The priests conclude that these demigods are powerful indeed, but only during daytime. Therefore, it is decided to attack them at night with 10,000 elite warriors. But the Spanish are constantly on guard, just as Cortes had ordered, and the attack is discovered, negating the element of surprise. The Spanish are well prepared in their defensive positions, and the attack is an even greater failure than the previous day's battle. Cortes again frees his prisoners and sends them back with gifts and a peace proposal. The Tlaxcalans conclude that there is no way they could defeat these strangers, therefore they might as well join them. The Spanish are given supplies and invited to the Tlaxcalan capital. Once here, even Cortes, ever so diplomatic, cannot help notice the sheer poverty of the Tlaxcalans. The chiefs explain that they would gladly give him gold, but all their valuables had been stolen by the Aztecs. On the other hand, if Cortes is truly there to bring peace and justice to the land, they would contribute 10,000 soldiers to his cause. Thus, the Spanish-Tlaxcalan alliance is formed, marking a turning point in the conquest of Mexico. When Moctezuma learns of this alliance, he realizes he can no longer ignore the problem. He sends another embassy, showering the Spanish with gifts and finally inviting them to his capital. With this ploy, he hopes to separate Cortes from his allies and deal with him on a more favorable ground where he would hold all the aces. In October, Cortes is ready to resume his march. He plans to take the direct route to Tenochtitlan through the city of Cholula. Cholula is closely allied with the Aztecs and untrustworthy according to the Tlaxcala. Contrary to their advice, Cortes only takes 2,000 Tlaxcalan warriors, trusting in his own arms and diplomatic abilities. When the Spanish arrive in Cholula, they are wined and dined for 3 days. Gradually, however, the Spanish perceive that the Choluans are giving them the cold shoulder. Cortes receives intelligence that large bodies of Aztec and Choluan soldiers are waiting to ambush them as soon as they leave the city. It's not clear if these allegations were actually true, but nonetheless Cortes decides to take preemptive action. He orders all the prominent people of the city to assemble. After confronting them with his accusations, he attacks them, killing many and burning down a large part of the city. After this massacre, a groveling delegation of Choluans begs Cortes for peace, promising him eternal loyalty. Cortes is happy to oblige. Moctezuma also sends a delegation, assuring Cortes that they had no part in the plot and welcoming them again to Tenochtitlan. A few days later, another delegation arrives, showering Cortes with gifts and asking him not to come to Tenochtitlan. This weak and indecisive diplomacy encourages Cortes even more, and on the 8th of September 1519 the Spanish enter Tenochtitlan. Moctezuma decides to make the best of the situation and warmly embraces Cortes in front of a large crowd. Cortes in turn gives all due respect to the emperor, professing friendship and love for him and his people. The Spanish are housed in one of the royal palaces next to Moctezuma's quarters. They are wined and dined with great extravagance, and Cortes has several courteous meetings with Moctezuma. The Spanish even find a room full of treasure that appears to have been planted there for them to find. But as the days go by, this festive atmosphere begins to sour. The turning point comes when the Spanish insist that a Christian cross be erected atop the main temple. This request is flatly refused, and the Spanish start to realize just how small and vulnerable they are in comparison to Tenochtitlan and the Aztec Empire. When word is received that a group of Spaniards whom they left back at Veracruz was ambushed and killed, and that the Totonacs had once again submitted to the Aztecs, the men become panicky. In their characteristic manner, the Spanish decide to solve this problem with a bold stroke and turn a potential defeat into victory. Their plan is to kidnap Moctezuma. Since the emperor's palace is close by and Moctezuma never keeps bodyguards in his throne room when receiving Cortes, the plan actually works. As he is transferred to the Spanish compound, Moctezuma fails to cry out for help, as this would cause him to lose face. Cortes's plan is to keep up all appearances as if the emperor was a free man, all the while ordering Moctezuma to do his bidding. First he asks the emperor to declare himself a vassal of Charles V. Then he asks for all the treasure in the empire to be brought to him. Then he asks for the men who killed the Spaniards at Veracruz to be killed in turn. Moctezuma sheepishly complies, but this is too much for his subjects to bear, who are now very close to revolt. When the Spanish believe things couldn't get worse, the unthinkable happens. 1,400 Spanish soldiers sent by Velázquez to arrest Cortes land at Veracruz. The The force is led by Panfilio Narvaez, a boastful nobleman who will stop at nothing to undermine Cortes. He sends a message to the Aztecs, saying that Cortes is in fact a bandit and a pirate who escaped from Spain and whose arrest had been ordered by the Emperor Charles himself. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Cortes immediately goes into action. He sets out with a force of 260 men to defeat Narvaez. Around 200 Spaniards under the command of Pedro de Alvarado are left behind in Tenochtitlan to guard the treasure and Moctezuma. To ease his way, Cortes sends emissaries laden with treasure into Narvaez's camp. Narvaez, being extremely avaricious, had already alienated a large number of his men and the Indians of Champoya. When these soldiers see how generous Cortes is, their fighting spirit begins to ebb, with some deserting to Cortes and others acting as spies. When Cortes launches a ferocious night attack, most of Narvaez's men surrender without much of a fight. With this daring coup, Cortes just tripled his force at very little cost to himself. Now at the head of 1,400 soldiers, Cortes begins his forced march back to Tenochtitlan. But when he reaches Tlaxcala, he is welcomed with grave news. All of Mexico had risen up, and Alvarado is currently being besieged in Tenochtitlan. According to Alvarado, the Aztec priests and nobility were plotting against the Spanish under the guise of a religious celebration. To preempt this, Alvarado covertly surrounded them and massacred a great number of prominent people, all of whom were unarmed. Cortes is greatly dismayed by this news and rushes back to Tenochtitlan with his 1,400 troops as well as 2,000 Tlaxcalan warriors. They manage to rejoin with Alvarado, however, as soon as the Spanish are in their compound, the Aztecs block all streets and avenues and destroy the bridges leading out of the city. The Spanish are now trapped. The Indians launch furious assaults against them, and with every day that goes by, their position becomes increasingly untenable. Cortes orders Moctezuma to go out on the ramparts to calm his people down. But by this time, Moctezuma's authority is gone. As he tries to speak, he is hit by a spear and is mortally wounded. Now the last chance to resolve things peacefully is gone. The Spanish need to get out fast, but this is easier said than done. On the night of June 30th, 1520, Cortes forms his army into 3 divisions. His plan is to stealthily cross the western causeway, the shortest one, and make his escape that way. He constructs a mobile bridge that he intends to move from one gap to another as his army marches along the causeway. Heavily laden with treasure, the Spanish and Tlaxcalans begin their evacuation. But as soon as they get to the first gap, they are discovered. Suddenly, tens of thousands of Aztec warriors descend on them, some along the causeway, others over the watering canoes. As the mobile bridge collapses, all discipline breaks down. Now every man has to fight for himself. All of the artillery and most of the treasure is lost, with hundreds drowning or being killed on the causeway. The slaughter continues outside the city, with large Aztec armies in hot pursuit. At Otumba, a massive army awaits the Spanish in an open field. But these men have never seen Spanish cavalry in action. Going all in, Cortes launches his cavalry straight at the Aztec general, throwing the entire army into chaos. The Spanish manage to break through. However, by the time they reach safety in Tlaxcala, only 440 Spaniards remain out of 1,600. The Noche Triste, or Sad Night, is the lowest point of Cortes's campaign. But Cortes, being as he is, refuses to back down. He renews his alliance with the Tlaxcala and sets about restoring his credibility. A number of Spanish and Tlaxcalan stragglers had been murdered by the cities surrounding Tenochtitlan. Cortes sends out several detachments to deal with these city-states one by one. He is greatly aided in this by constant supplies arriving to Veracruz. Velázquez, being ignorant of Narvaez's defeat, is still sending supplies. Settlers from a failed colony join Cortes, and other supplies arrive from Spain. Despite great efforts, the Aztecs lose more and more allies. To compound these problems, disease and famine start to decimate their numbers. Smallpox arrived in Mexico with Narvaez's men and is now ravaging Indians who have no innate immunity to it. The great urban center of Tenochtitlan is hit especially hard. With his enemy weakened and his credibility restored, Cortes lays out the plans for 13 shallow-bottomed brigantines to be later transported and assembled on the lake. On December the 25th, 1520, Cortes leaves Tlaxcala with around 950 soldiers and 10,000 Tlaxcalan allies. He marches to the city of Texcoco, a junior member of the Triple Alliance. The chiefs of Texcoco flee, and Cortes occupies the city that will serve as a base for the next stage of the campaign. As Cortes waits for his boats, he is challenged by several Aztec armies numbering in the tens of thousands. The fiercest battles are fought to the south around Charco. If the Mexica lose this city, the way will be open to Tenochtitlan. But nothing can stop Cortes. With his boats finally assembled, the Spanish descend on Tenochtitlan. Around 350 Spanish man the 13 brigantines. 3 equal divisions of 200 men each, made up of swordsmen, crossbowmen, musketeers and cavalry, are led by Pedro de Alvarado, Cristobal de Olid and Gonzalo de Sandoval. These are each backed up by 8,000 Indian allies. The siege begins on May 10, 1521. Alvarado and Olid move to the west of Tenochtitlan, cutting off the aqueducts to the city. Sandoval is first sent to besiege Iztapalapan in the south, then he is transferred north to assault the Tepeaquila causeway. Meanwhile, Cortes at the head of his small navy assaults a fortified island. The Aztecs try to overwhelm them, attacking with thousands of canoes at once, but Cortes's superior ships beat back every assault. Meanwhile, Alvarado probes the defenses of the western causeway. But the Aztecs easily beat them back, attacking simultaneously on land and water. Seeing this, Cortes orders his ships to reinforce his men, standing guard on both flanks of the causeway as the soldiers advance. To counter this, the Aztecs plant stakes in the lake bottom, immobilizing the Spanish ships, making them more vulnerable to attack. One night, 2 ships sent out to patrol the lake are drawn into such a trap. 1 brigantine is destroyed, and many Spanish are killed. Later, Cortes also lays an ambush for the Indians waiting to ambush him. The ambushers are destroyed, and the Aztecs never attempt to attack the Spanish ships again. Seeing these successes of the Spanish, the remaining allies of the Mexica defect to Cortes. The Spanish continue their advance along the causeways, making steady but difficult progress. Each time they advance, the Aztecs launch a counterattack. The Spanish decide to systematically demolish the houses along the causeways to deny their enemy all cover. Cavalry is of little use in this conflict, however, artillery proves to be priceless. The long and straight causeways prove to be ideal killing fields, where each shot finds hundreds of targets. On June the 24th, the Aztecs muster all their forces and launch simultaneous attacks against the Spanish. Alvarado is in great danger of being overwhelmed, but his artillery holds the front while his Indian allies guard the rear. Drunk with success, Cortes makes a big mistake 1 week later. He orders a general attack by all 3 Spanish columns designed to push all the way to the temples, destroying the Aztecs by 1 bold stroke. He himself leads the southern division and heroically pushes deep inside the city. But the Aztec retreat turns out to be a ruse. Cortes and his men are separated from their ships and Indian allies as thousands of Aztec warriors surround them. 65 Spanish soldiers are captured, and Cortes barely manages to get away. Emboldened by their success, the Aztecs continue their relentless attacks for days. As war drums resound all over the city, the Spanish captives are sacrificed one by one at the top of the Great Temple in full view of their luckier comrades. This gruesome spectacle so disheartens Cortes's Indian allies that most of them decide to leave. This is the second low point in Cortes's career, but in his characteristic manner he overcomes this issue too. He orders his men to strictly focus on blockading the city from now on. His navy is likewise sent to patrol the lake and prevent any communication with the shore. Seeing Cortes's dogged determination and his ability to turn defeat into victory, his Indian allies come back in even greater numbers than before. Weeks of blockade eventually take their toll, and the defenders become observably weaker. At the end of July, Cortes orders another general attack. After several days of careful siege warfare, the Spanish finally reach the temples on the 1st of August. The defenders retreat to the north of the city, the only place not under Spanish control. Several days of peace negotiation follow, but this is only meant to stall for time, allowing as many people to escape as possible. On the 13th of August 1521, the Emperor Cuauhtémoc also tries to escape by canoe. The Spanish ships spot this attempt, intercepting the canoes and capturing the Emperor of the Aztecs. The 93-day siege of Tenochtitlan is over. It's August 1521. As Cortes surveys the remnants of the once proud Aztec Empire from atop the Great Pyramid, he cannot help but congratulate himself. But as usual in these situations, there is already a problem. His conquistadors who made the conquest possible are clamoring for gold, but there is none. Most of the treasure was either lost during the Noche Triste or thrown into the lake by the Mexica. After Cortes and his captains take their part from what was left and reserve the emperor's share and pay for all the ship's equipment and powder, the men are left with a pittance. The solution is forthcoming: more exploration and more conquest. Cortes dispatches his men north, south and west to consolidate Spanish power in Mexico. In 1522, Olid subdues the Tarascan kingdom in the north and Jalisco in the west, and Sandoval conquers the Tabasco region in the south. In 1523, a race develops for Honduras and Guatemala between Cortes's men and Panama's governor Pedrarias Davila. Alvarado is sent to conquer Guatemala, and Olid is dispatched against Honduras. Meanwhile, Pedrarias is heading north into Nicaragua. The Spanish believe that there is another great empire in this area, but all they find is the remnants of the long-extinct Mayan Empire and very little gold. The conquistadors are settled down in their encomiendas, with Cortes himself taking a vast estate where he builds a palace fit for an Italian duke. Accusations of corruption and abuse of power follow, and in 1529 Cortes has to travel to Spain to clear his name. Cortes is received lavishly at court and showered with titles. However, judging him too independent, the emperor takes away his governorship, leaving him with a large hereditary estate, but no power. During this trip to Spain, Cortes meets a distant relative, Francisco Pizarro. Pizarro is the illegitimate son of a Spanish colonel, growing up neglected and abused, never learning to read and write, eventually becoming a swineherd. Tired of this poverty, Pizarro traveled to America in 1510, making a name for himself as one of the associates of Pedrarias Davila. Now he is also heading to court to obtain authorization and funding for the conquest of a mighty empire that he believes to lie south of Panama. Cortes's detailed description on how a mighty empire could be conquered is like mother's milk to Pizarro. He dutifully listens to Cortes and will use this knowledge later on. Having received his authorization and some scarce funding, he sails back to Panama. Here he is welcomed by his two associates, Diego de Almagro, a soldier of fortune of similar background, and Hernando de Luque, the vicar of Panama. Back in the day when Cortes was busy conquering Mexico and Pedrarias was driving north, these three men had a radical idea. They believed that the fabled riches the Spanish sought weren't in Central America, but rather in yet unexplored South America. In 1524, they scraped together the resources to launch a small expedition to the south. Luque uses his connections to obtain money and permits, while Almagro stays behind to gather more soldiers. Pizarro himself sets out with one ship and 100 men. They don't reach very far, and when they disembark, they only find barren marshland, a few scattered villages, and very little gold. Eventually, they have to return empty-handed, with Pizarro's reputation in tatters. There is, however, one consolation. While exploring, Pizarro heard tales of a great empire that was conquered by an even greater empire. The three associates see this as proof that their theory is correct, so they start planning for another expedition. By 1526, they managed to equip 2 ships. But since Panama is still rather undeveloped and Pizarro is not a man in good repute, they only managed to convince 160 men to come along. Therefore, Almagro is again left behind while Pizarro proceeds south. This time they sail for a much greater distance and land near the town of Tacames. Following Cortes's recipe, Pizarro tries to appear peaceful, but the Indians from Tacames decide to fight. After a brief skirmish, the Spanish rout them and occupy their town. While Pizarro explores the hinterland, a ship is sent out to further explore the coast. The ship comes across something very unusual. A large raft powered by sail carrying around 30 Indians. These people are all well dressed and carry sophisticated trade goods, a sure sign of a great civilization. Pizarro rejoices at the news, but has to concede that for the second time this civilization and the gold that would come with it eluded him. Just then, Almagro arrives with more men who are hungry for gold. This only compounds Pizarro's problems, so most of the men are sent back with Almagro to Panama. Pizarro himself and a small number of men decide to stay on the Isla Galo, an island off the coast of Colombia, to conduct further explorations and wait for more favorable winds. Pizarro and his small company nearly starve to death as concern about them grows in Panama. The new governor sends 2 ships to bring them back, but when the ships arrive, Pizarro refuses to go. He draws a line in the sand and makes his famous speech. Only 13 Spaniards and a few Indians decide to remain, the rest go back to Panama. By this time, the governor thinks Pizarro must be crazy. Nonetheless, Almagro and Luque manage to convince him to send Pizarro another ship, with a caveat that he must return in 6 months, whether he found anything or not. Pizarro makes the most of this and sails further south, discovering the city of Tumbes. Tumbes is a large city with well-constructed buildings and a lot of gold. Pizarro takes great care to appear peaceful, and the Indians welcome him to their town. Tumbes is already within the great Inca Empire that stretches from Ecuador all the way to Chile. The empire is ruled from Cusco by a small elite called the Inca. The furthest corners of the empire are connected to Cusco by a sophisticated road network. In the Inca Empire, everything is run by the state, creating an elaborate welfare system with much higher living standards than Spain itself. The Spanish are enchanted by all this wealth, but for now they are too weak to take any action, so they must return to Panama to gather more soldiers and more supplies. This is when Pizarro goes to Spain to gain the emperor's support and when he meets Cortes. He returns to Panama in 1530 and sets out the following year with 3 ships and 180 men. Almagro stays behind, drumming up more soldiers and more supplies. The Spanish sail directly to Tumbes, however once here they find the city burned down and deserted. Pizarro couldn't believe his luck when he finds out that a civil war had broken out in the Inca Empire. After the death of the great king Huayna Capac, the empire was divided between his rather indifferent legitimate son Huáscar and his energetic and ambitious illegitimate son Atahualpa. Atahualpa is not happy with this arrangement, so he attacks and defeats Huáscar, imprisoning him near Cajamarca. This happens just when the Spanish arrive in 1531. The civil war is a godsend for Pizarro, as now going along Cortes's playbook, he can divide and conquer and use the chaos to his benefit. To this end, he begins to extend his hold on the region around Tumbes, partly by war and partly by diplomacy. The town of San Miguel is founded, and Pizarro distributes rich encomiendas among his soldiers. This is the first time when he has the full confidence of his men. By 1532, Pizarro is on a winning streak and so decides to go for the grand prize. He receives intelligence that Atahualpa is in the nearby city of Cajamarca, so he resolves to go there and meet him. The Spanish set out with around 180 men in September, making quick progress across the excellent road network of the Inca Empire. Along their way, they face no opposition and get informed that Atahualpa is already awaiting their arrival. Up to this point, everything is going along Pizarro's plan, but when they reach Cajamarca, the gravity of the situation suddenly becomes apparent. 80,000 Inca soldiers are encamped around Cajamarca, waiting for Atahualpa's orders. The Spanish decide to put on a brave face and demonstrate their horsemanship to the emperor. Atahualpa is not impressed. He proposes to meet Pizarro the following day and offers the Spanish an empty compound where they could encamp. As the Spanish settle in, it dawns on them that they had just walked into a trap. After examining all possible moves, Pizarro has no choice but to fall back on Cortes's playbook. He decides to kidnap the Inca Emperor. Next morning, Atahualpa shows up. He is accompanied by thousands of his nobles and warriors. The Spanish have already positioned themselves in the buildings surrounding the central plaza. The men are all in armor, the horses have been saddled, and the muskets and cannons are loaded. Atahualpa senses that something is up and hesitates for a couple of hours. This, however, starts to look increasingly bad. It's unbecoming for such a great man as Atahualpa to show even an element of fear in the face of such a ragged band of adventurers. Because unlike the Aztecs, the Inca never believed the Spanish to be superhuman. They take them for what they are, a small band of very well-armed hooligans who will surely kneel when they are confronted by the might of the Inca state. Thus reasons Atahualpa when he orders his 5,000 companions to disarm and march straight into Pizarro's trap. When the square is full of people, a Spanish priest approaches Atahualpa. He summons the emperor to adopt Christianity and recognize the sovereignty of Charles V, the most powerful monarch. Atahualpa responds that he already has a religion and doesn't need a new one, and that this Charles could only be equal to him at best. He also demands that the Spanish explain their insolent behavior. This is when Pizarro gives the order to strike. After the cannons fire their deadly grapeshot into the crowd, the infantry closes all avenues of escape, and the cavalry charges in with shocking ferocity. Thousands of Indians are killed and a large number are captured. Only a few manage to escape. Atahualpa himself is taken prisoner. Meanwhile, his vast armies watch in disbelief. Since no one was expecting this outcome, no one knows what to do. The Spanish stay on guard all night, waiting for an imminent attack. But no attack comes. The commander of the army has been captured, and most of the nobility who are present are dead. Atahualpa's best generals who could have taken charge are all in the south. Thus, the leaderless army melts away into the countryside. The Spanish are now much more relaxed. Atahualpa is allowed to maintain his dignity and his royal court even in captivity. The prisoners are gradually released. The foremost thing in Pizarro's mind, of course, is gold. Atahualpa's greatest concern is his half-brother Huáscar. As soon as Huáscar finds out about his misfortune, he will surely use this situation to his advantage. Therefore, Atahualpa must rid himself of his captors as soon as possible, whatever it takes. To this end, he proposes that he will pay a ransom for his release. He promises to fill a room 7 meters by 6 meters by 3 meters with gold. Pizarro can hardly believe this is even possible, but nonetheless he agrees to go along. Surely enough, Huáscar does try to contact the Spanish. When Atahualpa finds out, he orders Huáscar to be put to death. Huáscar's last words are that the Spanish will avenge him. As the months go by, Atahualpa's fate catches up to him. The room is nearly full of gold, and Almagro arrives with 200 soldiers. Pizarro knows that in order to keep this gold, he will have to finish the job. He has to go to Cusco and fully conquer the Inca Empire. But what to do with Atahualpa? Releasing him would be suicidal, as Atahualpa is known to be a vengeful man. The Spanish already have all the gold he could marshal, and taking him along could be dangerous, as the Inca armies might attempt to free him. It's only logical that Atahualpa must die. This is what most Spanish want, but Pizarro hesitates for a time, knowing well how as a commoner, killing a king might not look good on his resume. Nonetheless, the decision is made. After a mock trial, Atahualpa is sentenced to death. On the 29th of August, 1533, he is garroted and his body is burned. With his death, the empire starts breaking apart. People who were so used to centralized control start to engage in anarchy. Crime skyrockets and parts of the empire break away. But this only facilitates Pizarro's plan. The Spanish make quick progress marching to Cusco. Resistance hardens as they approach the capital, but this is too little too late. Pizarro enters Cusco on the 15th of November, 1533. The Spanish immediately rob the temples and holy places, gathering even more gold. Manco Cápac, Huáscar's younger brother, is installed as puppet ruler. But as Pizarro and his men settle in, the inevitable happens. Another Spanish army arrives in the Inca Empire. This one is led by Pedro de Alvarado, the ruler of Guatemala, who also wants a piece of the pie. He marches towards Quito with 500 men. Pizarro immediately sends Almagro to confront them. Almagro and Alvarado reach Quito about the same time, only to find the city burnt and deserted and occupied by a third Spanish force. Sebastián Belalcázar, whom Pizarro had left command in San Miguel, also decided to raid Quito. But by the time he arrived, the Indians had already abandoned the city and hidden away the treasure. This puts Alvarado in a tight spot, as now he can only gain profit if he cooperates with Almagro. Therefore, in return for a modest sum, Alvarado agrees to leave and hands over command of his army to Almagro. With this inconvenience over, Pizarro can finally begin to consolidate his power. In 1535, he establishes a new capital, Lima. Lima is on the coast, a much more suited place for a maritime empire. Belalcázar is left in command in Quito, while Almagro takes charge in Cusco. But Almagro is unhappy with this arrangement. Being landlocked, he has to go through Lima and Pizarro if he wants any communication with Spain. Pizarro in turn thinks Almagro is too independent and too ungrateful. Almagro feels cheated, therefore he decides to explore further south and establish a new territory for himself. He equips 500 soldiers and heads south. But after a harsh crossing of the Andes and wandering through scorching deserts, the Spanish only find warlike Indians and no gold. Almagro is forced to return, being even more disappointed than before. While he was gone, a rebellion led by Manco had broken out. Manco besieges both Lima and Cusco. Lima is easily relieved, but Cusco is in a desperate state. Manco's forces nearly take the city, but when harvest time arrives, the soldiers melt away to collect the crops. Almagro arrives just in time to mop up, and Manco retreats with his forces to the jungle, founding a free Inca state that would last until 1572. But now the argument arises over Cusco. Pizarro's brother Hernando is in charge of the city. Claiming legal reasons, he refuses to hand it over to Almagro. Almagro is furious and takes the city by force in 1537. Hearing of this, Pizarro dispatches an army to confront them, but this force is destroyed in a daring night attack. Pizarro now has to backtrack and proposes peace. Almagro accepts, knowing little that Pizarro only wants to buy time. Indeed, by next year, Pizarro equips another army and sends them against Almagro. On April the 6th, 1538, the two armies meet at Las Salinas near Cusco. Thousands of Inca onlookers stare with glee as their conquerors massacre each other with such ferocity that has never been seen in America. Pizarro's soldiers come out victorious, and as a consequence, Almagro is executed. But Pizarro is not off the hook yet. Initially, when he received the treasure of the Inca, Charles V was very happy. But when he found out of Atahualpa's summary execution, he became displeased. Additionally to this, accusations of tax evasion mount against Pizarro. Therefore, in 1539, Hernando is sent to Spain to clear the Pizarro's name. But Charles had had enough of the Pizarros and orders Hernando's arrest. He will spend 20 years in jail, then live out his life in Spain, the only one of the Pizarro brothers to die from natural causes. Francisco Pizarro is murdered by loyalists of Almagro in 1541. After an interregnum, the first viceroy of Peru, appointed by Charles, arrives to Lima in 1544. When he tries to enforce laws designed to protect Indians, another brother, Gonzalo Pizarro, has him murdered. Gonzalo usurps power for a year, however, when the new viceroy Pedro de la Gasca arrives, most of his men desert. He is defeated in battle and subsequently executed. After this, Gasca sets out on the Herculean task of restoring order to an empire that has been in chaos for more than a decade. He does this task brilliantly, incorporating elements of the Inca state into the administration and economy of the new viceroyalty of Peru. This is just in time, for in 1546 two great discoveries are made. Giant silver deposits are found at Potosi in Bolivia and in the north of Mexico at Zacatecas. These discoveries usher in the first golden age of the Spanish Empire, with thousands of Europeans flooding in. More explorations are conducted in Florida and North America, but settlements here are few and far between. Colombia and Venezuela are settled. In Chile and Argentina, the Spanish run into difficulties, but eventually these territories too are incorporated. By the end of the century, the Spanish Empire in America spans the entire continent, reaching from California all the way to Buenos Aires. It's 1565. Miguel Lopez de Legazpi arrives to the Philippines with 5 ships and 500 men determined to found a colony. There were many expeditions with the same desire before, the largest one arriving in 1541, but all these have failed. Legazpi sets up his headquarters on the island of Cebu, expanding from there mainly through diplomacy. The northern islands easily adopt Christianity, however the Spanish soon find themselves at odds with the Muslim south. In 1571, Legazpi goes to war with the Sultanate of Brunei, who are backed by the Ottomans. The Spanish achieve a Pyrrhic victory and as a result occupy Manila, setting up their new capital there. The Christian north is now firmly in Spanish hands, however insurgency in the Muslim south continues until the 19th century. Chinese and Japanese pirates also give the Spanish a hard time. Due to logistics, most of the settlers arrive from Mexico. Getting there is easy, following the southern currents that flow due west. In 1565, an easy way of getting back is found, following the eastward currents in the north. Trade flourishes, with silver from America being exchanged for Indonesian spices and silk and porcelain from China. Every year the Manila galleon departs and slowly makes its way to the coast of California. From here it sails south to Acapulco. From there the cargo is transported overland by mule train to Veracruz. Here the silver mine in Mexico is added. The silver from Peru arrives by ship from Lima, then it's usually carried over the Isthmus of Panama. From here the cargoes are shipped to Cuba or Hispaniola, where sugar, the main cash crop of the Caribbean, is added. When a sufficient number of ships assemble, a treasure fleet is dispatched under heavy guard. In return, Spain sends manufactured goods, as well as wine and olives, growing which is illegal in the colonies. Slaves are brought by Portuguese ships, and later by the Dutch and English, as Spain possesses no slave colonies in Africa. All inbound and outbound trade is controlled and taxed in Seville by the Casa de Contracción, which was established in 1503. All goods coming from the colonies have to come to Seville, and all ships going to the colonies have to depart from Seville. In the beginning, all foreign ships are excluded, and trade is conducted within a closed system. The central administration of the colonies is conducted by the Council of the Indies. The Council of the Indies was initially established as a traveling court, then after the partition of Charles V's empire, it became a permanent establishment in Madrid. The empire was divided into two viceroyalties: the Viceroyalty of New Spain, centered on Mexico, which includes Central America, the Caribbean, Venezuela, and the Philippines, and the Viceroyalty of Peru, that integrates most of Spanish South America. The economic and social order is based on the encomienda. In this system, landlords, usually conquistadors and their descendants, are granted land and a number of Indian villages. These villages are obliged to provide a certain number of men to work on the lord's fields or in the lord's mines. Otherwise, the natives are left alone to govern themselves as they wish, as the landlords mostly live separate in and around the cities. This setup is not unfamiliar to the Indians. From their perspective, tyrannical native elites who extracted tribute have been replaced by a foreign elite likewise interested in extracting tribute. They find an ally in the Catholic Church, with early advocates such as Bartolomé de las Casas condemning their enslavement. As a reaction to this, the Emperor and later Philip II issue laws against the enslavement of the Indians. In America, however, he who owns the land makes the laws, so it will take many years until the natives are given a fair wage for their labor. After wars, epidemics, and enslavement have decimated their numbers, it takes a full century until their population begins to recover. However, by this time, 250,000 Europeans are already in the colonies. Most of them are young men, so through intermarriage, the majority of the people in the Spanish Americas will be of mixed race. Spain had to figure out how to govern vast amounts of territory in an age when communication with the furthest reaches of the empire often took more than a year. Spain achieved this by way of a sophisticated bureaucracy that almost ran itself. Branches of the government are separated, and top positions are usually filled by Castilians from Spain, people the locals call peninsulares. This minimizes corruption and ensures that the state's interests won't be subverted by local elites. Laws are not always carried out to the fullest, but they are also rarely opposed. There are sporadic clashes with the Indians, however these never threaten the empire itself. The economy flourishes, and all in all we can say that the Spanish Empire is very well run for the day. Indeed, by the reign of Philip II, the American colonies provide 1/5 of the royal revenue. Charles V's expedition to Tunis is financed by the Inca treasure, and later the silver mines provide an even larger hoard. If it wasn't for Europe and its age-old feuds, Spain and the empire would have prospered. But it wasn't to be so. Even in the time of Charles, expenses far outweighed incomes. The Habsburg Emperor had to simultaneously fight the French in Italy, the Ottomans in Hungary and the Mediterranean, and the Protestants in Germany. To make up for shortfalls in the state budget, Charles became heavily indebted to German and Genoese bankers. The first default on debt occurs in 1547, 1 year after he steps down and partitions his empire. Although his son Philip II is rid of the Italian wars, he still has to deal with the Ottomans in the Mediterranean and an even more formidable enemy, the Calvinist Dutch rebels. To make his problems worse, Philip gets involved in France's civil war. This triggers England's Protestant queen, Elizabeth I, to go to war with Spain. As a result, her privateers are unleashed on the Spanish treasure fleets. These privateers usually circle like sharks off the coast of Portugal, waiting for an opportunity. The most daring attacks are made by Francis Drake. In 1578, he goes where no Englishman had gone before and captures a treasure ship heading to Panama. Then Drake proceeds to complete the second circumnavigation of the world. Later, in 1585, at the head of a large fleet, Drake ransacks the Caribbean. In 1587, he attacks the treasure fleet near Canaries. Then finally, in 1595, he orchestrates a second invasion of the Caribbean, leaving destruction in his wake. Meanwhile, in 1578, Portugal's king dies without an heir. Philip seizes at the opportunity and annexes Portugal together with its massive maritime empire. This union proves disastrous for both countries. Portugal had been at peace with both England and the Dutch. Now they are at war. This is very convenient for the Dutch and the English, as they are already planning to set up their own competing empires in India and the Moluccas. By the early 1600s, attacks on Portuguese possessions are becoming endemic. As the senior member of the Iberian Union, Spain has the duty to protect Portugal. This further drains the treasury, even though revenues from the colonies keep increasing. With all the silver coming in from the Americas, an inflationary period turns even worse. More money is chasing the same amount of product, so product becomes more expensive. State bankruptcy soon becomes the routine in Spain. In 1621, Philip IV ascends the throne. He proves to be weak-willed and uninvolved, so his chief minister, the Count Duke of Olivares, takes over the governance of the country. Olivares keenly points out that Spain's greatest problem are the Dutch rebels. Therefore, in 1521, Spain becomes involved in a 30 Years' War on the side of the Austrian Habsburgs. The Catholic cause almost prevails, but in the end the war has to be resolved by negotiation. Spain is bankrupt again, as France becomes the dominant power in Europe. Olivares attempts to raise more funds, but in 1640 Catalonia revolts, followed by Portugal. Portugal manages to break away and concludes peace with England, and eventually the Dutch. This frees Spain from much responsibility, but by the mid-17th century its economy is already on its last legs. After Olivares failed to extract higher taxes from the different provinces, the burden falls on the core of Spain and the Spanish Empire, Castile. Taxes are raised and coinage is debased. As a result, state incomes decline and more bankruptcy follows. By the end of the 17th century, bankers own everything in Spain, and Castile is nearly depopulated. This period is also marked by the worst Spanish king, Charles II. Charles is the product of cousin marriage between Spanish and Austrian Habsburgs. He is feeble-minded and in weak health. Since the day of his birth, courtiers have been waiting for him to die. Charles finally dies in 1700, leaving behind no heir. The main contenders to the throne are the Bourbons of France and the Habsburgs of Austria. The War of the Spanish Succession erupts in 1701 and lasts until 1714. France manages to prevail against a coalition of Austria, England and the Dutch, but the Spanish Bourbons have to agree to keep Spain separate from France. The Bourbons gradually start to reform the country, however by this time Spain is already a second-rate power. Spain becomes inactive in Europe and defensive in its colonies. During the 17th century, rival naval powers had gained a firm foothold in the Caribbean. England conquers Jamaica in 1655, the Dutch established themselves in Curaçao, and the French acquire half of Hispaniola in 1697. The Spanish Empire's closed economic system is increasingly untenable now. Smuggling reaches endemic proportions, depriving the treasury of funds. The Dutch, and particularly the British, can provide much cheaper European goods, making the colonists interested in cheating Spain. Charles III, Spain's enlightened monarch, attempts to remedy this with reforms. He introduces two new viceroyalties in an attempt to make the empire more governable. He also excludes American elites from top positions in an attempt to reduce corruption. In Spain, he encourages industry and adopts a mercantilist financial policy. But in spite of all his efforts, the closed economic system of the empire cannot be maintained. Motivated by economic interests, Britain makes repeated attacks on Spanish America. In 1739, the so-called War of Jenkins erupts between Spain and Britain. The British captured Portobello and launched 3 very ample but in the end unsuccessful sieges against Cartagena. Spain enters the 7 Years' War on France's side, sparking the Anglo-Spanish War of 1762. As a result, the British launch another unsuccessful attempt against Cartagena. However, they do manage to capture Havana, Florida, and Manila. Havana and Manila are given back, but the British get to keep Florida. Since France was ousted from North America, the sparsely populated Louisiana territory is ceded to Spain. Siding against Britain in the American War of Independence, Spain manages to recover Florida. This is the period when the numerous star forts are built on the coast of America. After this turbulent period, a few calm decades follow. However, by this time, more and more colonial elites are talking about independence. This is the state in which the outbreak of the French Revolution finds Spanish America. Spain is forced into an alliance with France. Then in 1808, Napoleon invades the peninsula. The legitimate king is deposed, and Joseph Bonaparte, the emperor's brother, is installed as a puppet king. In 1809, independent governing councils are formed in many colonies. Initially, these are merely meant to be governing the provinces in the king's name, where Spain is under foreign occupation. However, with time, pro-independence forces start to gain the upper hand. In 1814, the legitimate king Ferdinand VII is restored. Ferdinand intends to reimpose everything to how it was before Napoleon. This is unacceptable for the colonials, who would like proportional representation in Spain's parliament and the liberal constitution of 1812 to remain in force. Ferdinand refuses to grant any concessions, so the colonies break out in open rebellion. Spain dispatches several expeditions against the rebels, but these become spread out far and wide, eventually being defeated in detail. As José de San Martin advances from the south, Simón Bolívar moves against the loyalists from the north. Agustín de Iturbide, the leader of the pro-independence movement in Mexico, first tries to negotiate. When this fails, he clears the loyalists from Central America. Only the Caribbean and the Philippines remain loyal to Spain. Half of Florida is lost to the United States in 1810, the other half is sold in 1821 as part of the Adams-Onis Treaty. The Louisiana Territory had already been taken by Napoleon in 1800 and then sold to the United States in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Santo Domingo, the Spanish part of the island of Hispaniola, declares its independence in 1821, but the new state is quickly overrun by Haiti. Thus, Spain recolonizes it, but the growing insurgency means they have to abandon the island in 1865. In 1898, the Spanish-American War breaks out, with disastrous consequences for Spain. Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines are lost to the United States. Spain plays a modest role in the scramble for Africa, acquiring the territory called the Spanish Sahara and a small claim along the equator. Little investment is made in these colonies, as Spain struggles with internal conflict. Equatorial Guinea gains independence in 1968. After Morocco becomes independent, it lays claim to the Spanish Sahara. In 1975, Spain is finally forced to abandon it due to an increasing insurgency, with Morocco occupying the territory. By the end of the 20th century, only the Canary Islands and a few enclaves on the North African coast remain of the former possessions. Thus came and went the Spanish Empire. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, it helps with the algorithm. Check out my Patreon if you want to help me on this journey. Links down below.